this edition of Consciousness Raising Online. Got a lot of information to share with you today, and I decided to do this particular subject because, we actually have so much information coming at us from so many different platforms, as they like to say, and ways. And news, true news, has become, what is it I want to say? I want to say true news has become, in a lot of ways, entertainment news. There's very little true uh, objective analysis, and there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation. But the thing that really bothers me the most is how much unrest there is in the world. Now, the graphic I have up right now, and you can look at it, glance at it while I'm talking as I'm opening up, but I'm not going to go through a lot of it. But I wanted you to, now this is just starting at July of 2014. And as you glance down at the list, it goes to March of 2015. These are all the different places where there were different kinds of unrest going on. And at the beginning, at the top of the list is Ghana, where they said thousands of people. If you go all the way to the right, you see how many people are estimated to have participated. And they said NGOs, non-governmental organizations, trade unions, workers, opposition. That's in Ghana. Then you see China, Hong Kong, and I'll get into the Hong Kong a lot deeper because that's a real deep situation. Then there's Pakistan and the United States. August of 2014, United States grand jury decisions involving the deaths of Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and Freddie Gray, among others. Black men killed by white police officers. So that was one of the things. Remember, we had the hands up stuff going on, Black Lives Matter, and things like that, right? And they said thousands, youth, students, and general public. That's interesting. General public? I don't think so. It was mostly black people. Wasn't general public. Then you got Armenia, China, Hong Kong again, Azerbaijan, Burkina Faso, which of course is an African country. Burkina Faso, which means land of the upright people or land of the upright man. Tens of thousands, they said. Hungary, Ireland, Albania, Thailand. So you have all these different countries with all these different things going on, right? Now, this one here, it's a continuation. The list is too long for me to go put the whole list up there. Excuse me. But this goes from March of 2015 to just to August of 2015. And I stopped it there because, like I said, just so many. But look at this. Brazil, Hungary, Burundi, Guatemala, Macedonia, Moldova, Armenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Iraq, Brazil, Japan, Lebanon, Malaysia, all these different countries, all these different kinds of protests and uprisings and unrest. Many times young people. So what we've got going on, and that was 2015. I'm gonna jump to the future in a minute. But just in 2015, there was significant protests. Like I say, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Bosnia, Brazil, Burundi, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Guatemala, Iraq, Japan, Lebanon, Macedonia, Malaysia, Moldova, Venezuela, with mass demonstrations in Bolivia, Spain, Iraq, and Russia, and also the Czech Republic, Algeria, Sudan, In Kazakhstan, upheavals from Lebanon and Iraq to Zimbabwe and Chile. In Latin America, Chile's riots follow mass protests in Ecuador, Argentina, and Honduras. In Eastern Europe, Romania, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Serbia, and Georgia. Even Vladimir Putin had to deal with the largest street demonstrations in Russia since 2012. Other areas of uprising and protests and unrest: Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Myanmar, Nicaragua. Now, one of the things that's interesting, or deep rather, is that so many involve young people. And understand there are more young people than ever before. About 41% of the global population of 7.7 billion people is aged 24 or younger. So 4 out of every 10 people is 24 or younger. In Africa, 41% is under 15. And that's real interesting, deep to think about when you have 4 out of every 10 Africans in Africa are under 15 years old. Think about how close that is to half the population. It's more than a third. In Asia and Latin America, where 65% of the world's people live, Asia and Latin America. And understand when I say Asia, it doesn't mean like just Japan or China. It also includes part of Russia and India. Those are Asian countries. Part of Russia is Asian. Okay. Um, in Latin America and Asia, 25% of the people are under 24. Now, in the more quote the more developed countries, it's just the other way. 16% of Europeans are under 15. About 18% are over 65. See, so they got a big imbalance in terms of Europeans. Every month in India, 1 million people turn 18 and can register to vote. Think about that. Every month in India. In the Middle East and North Africa, an estimated 27 million young people will enter the workforce in the next 5 years. So any government, whether elected or not, that fails to provide jobs, decent wages, and housing are going to have big trouble. Okay? We live in a world of violent challenges, and challenges especially to the status quo. And some huge rebellions. Now keep this map in mind. We'll come back to it, but this is what many times Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. We're going to come back to these in a minute because what we need to understand is that in these countries, for an example, Chile, youth initiated demonstrations against cost of living pressures and income inequality. That's what's going on in Chile, and they have some huge, huge protests. An estimated 1 million people demonstrated last month, and in that one day, 19 people died, 2,500 have been injured, and 2,800 arrested. They're serious. They're serious. Okay? Now that's Chile. We'll come back to the map in a little bit so you can look at again where it is. In Ecuador, Ecuador, mm, the government has been, the government officials actually have been run out of town. They had to flee the capital. If that's something, they serious in Ecuador. Union, student, and indigenous protests against the government there. Um, how about Argentina? Argentina, I just want you to look at where it is. Protests against economic crisis, inflation, and rising food prices. That's a serious issue when you get to mess with people's food. Now, Argentina's pretty big, one of the biggest countries in South America. Okay? So they've been having serious protests. Bolivia. Now, the interesting thing about Bolivia, they've been attacking the police stations and homes of politicians. They've been burning down the homes of politicians. And they just recently drove the president, Evo Morales, out of office. He left the country. We say, well, wait a minute, what is the deal with Bolivia? One of the things about Bolivia, and you'll see it again in a minute when you look at the map, there's a lot of drug cocaine making in Bolivia, and they've been having some serious issues in Bolivia. Now I want to look at a little country called Peru. You see Peru on the map? There's Bolivia, there's Ecuador, there's Argentina, and there's Chile. Okay? Uh, so now Peru. Now the thing about Peru is this. Most of the coca that is used, that is cooked down, etc., to be cooked into cocaine paste, most of it's actually grown in Peru. Okay, and then they run it down to Colombia, and they do a lot of processing there. Okay, um, Venezuela. Let's look at Venezuela here for a minute. Demonstrations against a socialist government accused of election fraud, etc., etc. All right, there's Venezuela up at the top of South America. See how close it is to Colombia? And we don't hear a lot about economic collapse and failure of water and energy systems. Wow, that's deep, ain't it? Uh, hmm, yeah. So I keep these in mind. I'm just really giving you an idea about these different countries so that you can see them in your head as to where they are in the world. Because see, that's just South America. Okay. Now, the biggest country in South America, and especially important when it comes to black people, is Brazil. And you're going to see a map in a minute, Nayo. I'll explain what that is in a minute. But you're going to see a map in a minute that's going to show you Brazil's relationship to Africa. And as you look at that, it helps to explain why so many more Africans were taken to Brazil. So there's over 2.5 times more African or black people in Brazil than there is in the United States. And they speak Portuguese because, of course, it was colonized by Portugal, a little tiny country. But you see its relationship to the United States. Now, Brazil, here's the deal: that Elenio, that's in reference to um, Bolsonaro. You've been hearing his name lately. That's him there, Bolsonaro. Here's the deal: um, Bolsonaro won the election, but now here you're going to hear some things that may remind you of a certain guy in this country. He provoked controversy for a series of remarks made to and about the federal deputy and former human rights minister Maria do Rosario. During a congressional debate, Bolsonaro said that minors should be treated as adults if they commit heinous crimes such as murder or rape, to which Maria do Rosario responded by calling him a rapist. Then Bolsonaro then stated that Congresswoman Rosario was, quote, not worth raping. She is very ugly, unquote. The remarks drew considerable condemnation throughout Brazil. And in the aftermath of these remarks, Bolsonaro was tried and convicted in a federal court in September 2015 on counts of hedonic damages against Rosario. In June of 2016, the federal Supreme Court responded to a complaint filed by the Attorney General and decided to open two criminal actions against Bolsonaro. The Supreme Court ruled that he had potentially incited rape and defamed the honor of his fellow deputy. He faced a penalty of up to 6 months in jail and a fine. Ultimately, in August of 2017, an appeals court upheld a lower court's verdict, which found Bolsonaro guilty and sentenced him to pay a fine to Rosario of 10,000, about the equivalent of $2,500 in U.S. currency. This lawsuit was dismissed by the Supreme Federal Court as Bolsonaro was inaugurated as president in 2019. Portuguese for "not him" movement. That was the formalized movement against Bolsonaro. And they were demonstrations led by women. Took place in 114 cities in all the states of Brazil and more than 50 other countries. These were mostly protests against him and his presidential campaign. Again, does that sound familiar when we had the protests in this country of women against a certain tramp? Yeah, he's a lot like him too. So now I want to catch this real quick when it comes back around again, because for those who have never been to Brazil, there's an area called Bahia, which is heavily, I mean, the majority of people in that region are black, and they consider themselves Afro-Brazilian. And that's a relatively new growth of the movement of seeing themselves as any relationship to Africa. Okay? And as Brazilians would tell you, they'd come to this country to live. A lot of them said, well, I never thought of myself as black until I came here. You see Bahia up here on the right-hand side, that whole brown area apparently is very heavily black or Afro-Brazilian. All right, let's move on to Colombia. Colombia today. Now this is fresh off the press. In Colombia, hundreds of thousands of people uh, took to the streets Thursday in the largest national strike the country has seen in years. Labor unions, students, teachers, indigenous, and Afro Colombian activists joined in peaceful marches across urban and rural Colombia as anger mounts against right wing President Ivan Duque and his cabinet. The protests were triggered by Duque's proposed labor reforms and cuts to the pension system, as well as a recent military airstrike against a camp of alleged dissident rebel drug traffickers, which killed 8 children. Police responded to the movements with repressive tactics and tear gas in the cities of Bogota, Cali, and Medellin, and Colombia's borders with Venezuela, Ecuador, Brazil, and Peru were shut down in response to the national strike. Indignation against Duque's government has brewed since the U.S. backed president took office in August of 2018, and social activists have continuously denounced Duque's sabotage of Colombia's historic peace accords, which was signed in 2016 after half a century of war. Now let's look at this because this is deep. You see Colombia there, and when we come back to that map again, you'll see it even closer. Medellin is one of the largest known drug trafficking areas in South America and in the world. All the big time uh, drug kingpins that they always talk about, they come out of Colombia. Now, I mentioned a minute. Okay, you see Medellin there, Bogota, Cali. Yeah. Now here's the deal in Colombia. In 2016, the then president Juan Manuel Santos signed a peace deal with FARC, FARC, which stands for the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, to end Colombia's civil war after 50 years. Listen to me, 50 years. They had a civil war there. And what are we talking about? Well, um, since 50 years goes back to 1969, right? 50, yeah. Okay. Now, what happened was this. The Sandinistas toppled the right-wing dictatorship in 1979. Y'all remember the word Sandinistas? A certain President Ronald Reagan and them. Remember they were trading drugs for arms? And they were sending the arms down there to fight for the right wing, to fight the Sandinistas. Okay? That's how that whole crack thing got started. They were trading arms for drugs. But the Sandinistas won anyway. But they have been fighting a civil war in Colombia for 50 years. Right down the road, and in a way, we act like we don't know nothing about it because we really don't hear much about it. But a lot of the refugees and people who have been coming to the United States for asylum have come from down there, from Colombia and Nicaragua and Venezuela and Bolivia and Argentina and Ecuador and Chile. Look at all that disruption down there. Okay? So, now that's South America. Now, for a minute, I want to take a look at a country we don't really pay much attention to. This is another one that's got a lot of folks coming here, and that's Nicaragua. Now, Nicaragua is not in South America. It's in what we call Central America. Okay? I will point this out because of this. You see Honduras there and Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala. Nicaragua's right there in the middle. We have a lot of people who come to the United States from Nicaragua because they've had a lot of disruption there, a lot of it from propagated by the United States and the CIA, etc. The police have been trained here, quite a bit, quite a few in what we call the School of the Americas, what it used to be called. But you see that? See, that's Central America, not South America. So I want you, and I say this because I want to put the term Nicaragua in your head. See where it is in relationship to Jamaica and Belize and Mexico? Yeah, Nicaragua. So they have a lot of stuff going on in Nicaragua. All right, let's go where we know a lot of folks, and that's Haiti. They've been having tons of protests in Haiti, especially in Port-au-Prince and other cities in the countryside. They shut down transportation, businesses closed schools, and it's paralyzed a nation of 11 million people. Who's protesting? Well, actually, thousands of Haitians from all walks of life, the young, union workers, university professors, artists, business associates. And they say that it's unique because the middle class and the intellectual elite are participating as well. There's just so much unrest in Haiti. And we know this because we know that Haiti is still feeling the wrath of the European nations, including the United States, for their successful revolution. And it was determined back then that they would never allow Haiti to become anything worthy of its revolutionary activities. Because when it happened, the European nations said, "Oh no, 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 we can't allow this we can't allow it everywhere." In fact, we had some of the biggest rebellions in this country after the Haitian Revolution. So they had to shut it down, and they've tortured Haiti ever since. They've sown the hatred of Dominican Republic, which is part of the same island, but they just tortured people, and it's really ugly what they've done. Uh, and Haiti has more so-called charitable organizations or non-governmental organizations than any other country in the world, and yet they're doing worse than any other country in the world. And of course, the Clintons were down there, Bill Clinton especially. Um, they It's just unbelievable. They won't be happy until they've just totally crushed the Haitian people, and they refuse to be crushed. They refuse to be crushed. And what we have actually allowed to happen without supporting the Haitian people is going to come back to haunt us because we really have not done them right. So that's another area of the world where there's all kinds of uprising, unrest, and rebellion. Now, Hong Kong, which is somewhat in the news, we don't really get a lot about it, but it's there in the news. It's been going on for a while. But we need to understand about what Hong Kong is. It's an international finance hub on China's southern coast. What you need to understand is that Hong Kong was a British colony until 1997. And then they handed it back to China under a special policy known as one country, two systems. Now, the first thing you got to understand is that when Great Britain gave it back to China, you understand? What does that mean? Gave it back to. That means at one time it belonged to China. And when you see where it is, you say, of course it's part of China. But that policy, the one country, two systems, made Hong Kong part of China, but let it keep many liberties denied citizens on the mainland, including free speech, unrestricted internet access, and the right to free assembly. The territory has its own laws, system of government, and police force under a mini constitution known as the Basic Law. China promised that the system would remain in place until at least 2047. However, they've been chipping away at it, right? This past February, the local government introduced a bill, which they then scrapped, that would have allowed people accused of crimes to be sent to places where Hong Kong had no extradition treaty, including mainland China, where the courts, of course, are controlled by the Communist Party. Now, the president of Hong Kong is a woman named Carrie Lam. She said they needed the bill to guarantee justice in cases like a man who was accused of killing his girlfriend in Taiwan, then evaded prosecution by fleeing to Hong Kong. But the critics said the bill would allow Beijing to target dissidents in Hong Kong with phony charges and snatch them up to China, the mainland. But now, here's what I want you to do when this comes up again and look at this map and look at where Hong Kong is and then look at where Taiwan is, Shanghai, look at those countries. But, Hong Kong belongs to China. It really does. Now, there's Carrie Lam at her inauguration, and that's her cabinet. And all the way to the right is the president or the head guy in China. So where's Hong Kong? Right there, attached to China. And see, the reality is that, and see, this is Hong Kong, where they like to float the U.S. flag. And those are some of the protests in Hong Kong, huge ones, because they really want to be a part of the West. Because this is what happens when you colonize people. It was colonized by Great Britain, and they groomed their own. It's like you look at the Caribbean islands. You got the British Caribbean islands, like the Bahamas, etc., and the people still have a lot of the British customs. That's why they drive on the same side of the road as Great Britain, and they talk with many of them try to talk with a British accent, and they got British formed cultures because the British colonized it. Okay, so you have that going on, and that's why the people see. You have to understand a lot of the protests and stuff going on. They're inspired and helped by the West, including Great Britain and the United States. That's how come they be flying, walking around with American flags, right? And all right, I put this up so you can see where Taiwan is. Taiwan in relationship to Japan, South Korea. Look at this. All of that's all in the same area. China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand. Did you realize that all of that's right there next to China? That's where the brothers was being sent to fight in Vietnam and all of that. All of that's right in that same area. Okay, we had no business over there. Then there's South Korea, North Korea, Japan. Okay, so it's a lot of stuff going on over there in that. Like they say they love to go to Hong Kong. I say I ain't going over there. Let's look at Barcelona, Catalonia. Now, this is over in Europe itself. In Catalonia, that's the Catalan independence movement in Barcelona, and they've been fighting over there too. They had a general strike. See, in a lot of these other countries, they have what they call national strikes or general strikes. That's where all the different workers. It's not like in this country we have strikes, but it's generally very narrow. Like for example, the auto workers might have a strike, and they might have some support from some uh, folks who work in the same industry. But you don't have like a general strike in this country. Never is, at least not in time that I know of, where they've had a national strike where all the workers quit or go on strike. In Catalonia, though, just recently they had a half a million people. You see that long line of people? Um, See, what's been happening is Catalonia has been trying to break away from Spain. Okay, they want to break away from Spain. That's it up there in the corner, Barcelona. And Spain said, "No, nah, that ain't happening. We ain't splitting this up." And so they've been having lots and lots of protests and unrest. And I look at this sometimes and I say, half the world is police. Half the world is police. Because where do they get them all? Okay? Now, let's look at Africa for a minute. And so many different things going on in Africa that I said, well, let's look at this. That's a statue of Cecil Rhodes. Because what happened in South Africa, Rhodes must fall. That was a protest movement that started in March of 2015. And it started out as a protest at the University of Cape Town, protesting Cecil Rhodes and the statue that was on the ground at the University of Cape Town. Now, why this is important to remember or to recall is this. Um, it was saying, hey, let's get this guy off of here. And it started a movement over there that actually had some relationship to what jumped off over here. Because if you recall, we started having movements about removing the Confederate statues and monuments and stuff. Because it just made sense. Why we have these monuments and statues to the people who lost the war? Remember, that's what happened. The Confederacy lost the war. So how come they get to have monuments and stuff? And so the movements were related in that sense. But we also had a lot more happening in across Africa. China, Russia, and the Islamist militants, they all been getting more and more holds on different areas. But you have to remember, Africa is huge. Okay, so as you look at this map, you see the Mali war. Mali, they state of war. Chad having a war. Sudan, civil unrest. South Sudan, war. Libya, especially since they killed Gaddafi, they definitely been going through a lot of change. That country is so tore up since they killed Gaddafi. And then people over there say, "Ooh, dang, we shouldn't have let that happen." Yeah, we shouldn't have. Somalia, war. Togo, over on the left side, civil unrest. Guinea-Bissau, civil unrest. Nigeria's has elections, big elections coming up, but parts of Nigeria is basically at war. Remember, they kidnapped. Now, Nigeria is the is the country in Africa that has the most population. Okay, it's also the sixth biggest oil producer. Okay, now you see in the middle DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. That's Sub-Sahara's largest nation and the world's biggest cobalt producer. And they use cobalt in a lot of electronics and all of that stuff. Okay, so in Zimbabwe is that uh, you know they let the West convince a lot of people in Zimbabwe. They let the West convince them to get rid of Mugabe, and now they crying because they say, "Oh man, it was so much better when Mugabe was president." Because he was. And now, the people that took over since Mugabe left, they talking about giving the land back to the to the uh, to the white farmers. Yeah, because Mugabe and them, they were taking that land. They said, no, 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 we taking our land back. Okay, so um, South Africa has elections coming up, and they're trying their best to try to get that straight because here's what happened. With all these countries in Africa where the white folks were running it and they had the best land and had all the business and everything like that, well, they didn't really get true independence. The West, meaning the European countries and the United States, they basically said, look, you black folks, y'all can be politically in charge, but you can't be economically in charge and militarily in charge, and you're not going to take the land away from the white people. And they said basically, if you try to do it, we will invade you and we'll shut you down, and we won't give you no money from the World Bank, etc. So that crippled those independence movements, especially in Zimbabwe and South Africa. Now, the people have a right to their land back, but they're still fighting with the West. And a lot of the Western people, including a lot of black people in the United States, don't seem to understand that. They listen to what the white folks tell them, say, no, they should let the farmers keep their land. No, the land was stolen. And they can either leave. And of course, when that happened in Zimbabwe and in South Africa at first, they said, well, if the white people leave, the black people can't farm. They don't know how to farm. We invented farming. But what happens is when the World Bank and people like that get to messing with them, they say, well, y'all can't get no credit. So you can't buy equipment, you can't get this and that. And then they turn around and say, see, we told y'all the Africans can't really take care of themselves. So it's a cold-blooded way they do that stuff. But we should understand when you see it, investigate it more, because with other areas of the world where there's lots and lots of stuff, like here in Afghanistan, what I want you to do is understand this. Look at where it is. Understand that the United States has been over there at war. What they say the longest conflict in U.S. history is in Afghanistan. Now look at where Afghanistan is. There's Iran, Pakistan, India, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, all them stands, right? That's where they have sent our American soldiers, and they've been there for the longest conflict in U.S. history. In the middle of that mess, I saw this and it really hit me. I said, oh, no, 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 no. We should not be over there. Why the hell are we over there in the middle of that? Okay? That's just wrong. And All that money that has gone there, it's like what they say, like a boat. What is a boat? It's a hole in the water that you pour money into. What's Afghanistan? Remember this. Before the United States got involved there, who was there before them? The Russians had a long 10 years war over there and they couldn't win. And that's part of how we ended up with um, what happened here on 9/11. See, when Russia was over there in Afghanistan, they were fighting these folks, and the United States, through the CIA primarily, was helping the quote Afghanistan rebels, which included such people as one Osama bin Laden. And then the CIA pulled out from under them and left them there. And they got hurt really bad by the Russians, but they didn't lose. They still fought back so hard that the Russians eventually pulled out, got out of there. Okay? But these fighters, these rebels there, they were so angry at the United States for abandoning them that they declared, uh, basically, they declared war on the United States. And that's how we ended up with not just 9/11. We had quite a few incidents. In fact, the area that got the plane crashed into in 9/11 had been hit already before that with a bomb. Remember the truck bomb in the basement, in the parking lot of that same area? Then they had an attack on the CIA headquarters by uh, Afghanistan rebel or ISIS, whatever you want to call them. So it wasn't just one little thing. And then, of course, the United States said, okay, we're going to take it to them over there in Afghanistan, fight them in them caves and all that stuff. And we've been stuck over there ever since. Okay? Craziness. There's a place called Lebanon. Lebanon, they've been fighting over there in Lebanon for some years. And you notice how, look at that, look at that. Um, One of the things about Lebanon that I learned about years ago was a minor thing, but it touched me is this. Um, there was a comedian named Danny Thomas years ago, and Danny Thomas started a hospital for children, and they don't charge. To this day, they don't charge. Um, and the families are put up near there and stuff while they're there with their children. And I think they mostly specialize in cancer, but I think it's children's diseases. In fact, his daughter Marlo Thomas still helps promote the raising money for what is it, St. Jude's. Um, but Danny Thomas, unlike many of the comedians of his time and people in entertainment, and that's where it means he came from Lebanon. And it's a long history there. I won't go into it, but it's something you might want to do if you want to know more about why there's so much conflict in what they like to call the Middle East. You know, it's not really the Middle East. It's just their way of trying to take certain parts of the world out of Africa. And then you got areas like Turkey and Syria and Iraq. Look at that. Iraq, Syria, Iran, Jordan, Israel, Beirut, Lebanon, all of that. Turkey, right? How come all of that stuff is just all of that? You see where Russia is and Turkey. Now, up there to the right, Kurdish inhabited area. Remember, this is what just happened recently when the present resident took the troops out of there. They were protecting the the Kurds who had been helping them fight ISIS. And as soon as they pulled them out, then uh, Syria came in there and started killing them off, running them out. And Russia moved in too. Russia moved right in there. And then people wonder why people assume that the president resident is kind of close to Putin. All right. One more up in that area I want us to take a look at because it's also been in the news a lot and we don't know much about it. Area called Ukraine. Remember, that's what this whole impeachment inquiry has been about. Ukraine. Now look at where Ukraine is. Russia's right there, Belarus, Poland, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia. Okay, that's Ukraine. Somewhere in the middle of in the middle of a mess. Now why? Now you ask yourself why was all these folks from Trump and them's people, friends, associates, and even Biden, he was on the board of a power company in the Ukraine. What's the deal on the Ukraine? You should study it up and find out. Odessa is in Ukraine. Remember the Odessa files? Yeah. So there's something about Ukraine we should know about. And not just because Giuliani was running over there acting stupid. And last but not least, at least got to pay a little attention to the U.S. of A. Um, of course, we had Black Lives Matters in the last few years, but there's a lot of protests going on in the United States, but not compared to the rest of the world. Just a few places where folks get to fighting with police. Remember the Occupy movement, Occupy Wall Street, and they were moving all across the country with Occupy this, Occupy that. Well, one of the things that I find interesting is we have so many people who are homeless in this country, and what's going to happen when they start protesting? See, I saw recently where they stopped calling, in some places they stopped calling homeless, they call them unsheltered. Give me shelter. And I think that's part of the idea that, people are entitled to food, clothing, and shelter, a roof over their head. And as we go towards winter here in Chicago, we have homeless people that live in, they have these encampments. And all across the country, we got encampments of homeless people. We got students, we got high school students and public school students who are homeless. And yet they're still trying to go to school. And of course, we still have the issue of police brutality and police murders. It doesn't stop. So I just wanted to take a little bit of a tour around the world and look at all the unrest going on in this country, in the world. And like I say, we're under so much information that we can't keep up with it. And the news really, the major news organizations, they don't really tell you much. They might give 10 seconds to 15 seconds per country or per conflict in a newscast. And you got to have a lot of stuff going on to even make the newscast. But I think that we should at least try our best to keep up with them and know about the ones that, well, they all matter, but especially the ones with black folks. We black folks should know. Okay? And as always, I'm going to close now with no justice, no peace, no love. KNOW.